Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to day 64 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam, third canto. And we are in chapter 23. Chapter 23 is titled Devahuti's Lamentation. And there's a big section from verse 12 to verse 42, kind of right in the middle of the chapter, and we've read the verses so far. So now we're going to go through the verses and the purports of that section. But first of all, let us recite our prayers. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschyachade Shatarane Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindubhya eva cha, patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. All right, let us get into, it is actually the fourth section in chapter 23, titled Devahuti's Lamentation. So fourth section, verse 12 to verse 42, Kardama produces an aerial mansion. So verse 12, Maitreya continued, O Vidura, seeking to please his beloved wife, the sage Kardama exercised his yogic power and instantly produced an aerial mansion that could travel at his will. So Srila Prabhupada makes the point right at the beginning of the purport that the words yogam astita are significant. Yogam astita. They're in the second line of the Sanskrit, and it means exercised his yogic power. Yogam astita, exercised his yogic power. He was perfect in yoga, means mystical type yoga, and therefore, as a result, Prabhupada says, as a result of yoga practice, there are 8 kinds of perfection, the 8 mystical cities. The yogi can become smaller than the smallest, greater than the greatest, lighter than the lightest, can achieve anything he likes, can create even a planet, can establish influence over anyone, etc. That is 6 of the 8. There's 2 others, and I don't know exactly what the other 2 are. So, but then Prabhupada makes the point. So in this way, yogic perfection is achieved, and Kardama was completely perfect in yoga. But then after this, one can achieve the perfection of spiritual life, means Krishna consciousness. So therefore, Prabhupada makes the point at the end of the purport, so it's not wonderful for Kardama Muni to produce a mansion in the air to fulfill the desire of his beloved wife. Verse 13, it was a wonderful structure, bedecked with all sorts of jewels, adorned with pillars of precious stones. Excuse me. and capable of yielding whatever one desired. It was equipped with every form of furniture and wealth, which tended to increase in the course of time. Amazing. So Srila Prabhupada gives a sort of moderate purport. It's not so big, but it's not so small. He says that this castle created by Kardama, it can be called a castle in the air. Yeah, but the thing is, he actually produced it by his mystical power. A huge castle in the air. For us, we can't imagine a castle in the sky. As I recall, it has 7 floors. Excuse me, gosh. Yes. So, but if Prabhupada says, if we really think about it, we can understand it's not impossible. So if the Supreme Lord can create so many planets, which carry millions of castles in the air, so surely a perfect yogi like Kardama can easily construct one castle. So the castle is described as Sarva Kama Dugham, yielding whatever one desired. It was full of jewels. Even the pillars were made of pearls and valuable stones, and these jewels and stones did not deteriorate. They were everlasting and increasingly opulent. So sometimes we hear of castles, thus bedecked, means with these types of facilities and materials on the surface of this earth. And Prabhupada makes the point that Lord Krishna's castles, palaces in Dwaraka for his 16,108 wives, they were so bedecked with jewels, they had so many jewels, that there was no need of lamplight during the night. Right, and on we go to verses 14 and 15. The castle was fully equipped with all necessary paraphernalia, and it was pleasing in all seasons. It was decorated all around with flags, festoons, and artistic work of variegated colors. It was further embellished with wreaths of charming flowers that attracted sweetly humming bees. And Prabhupada, when Prabhupada uses this term wreaths, he's referring to garlands. A wreath, traditionally a wreath is a type of garland, you could say. Very often made with leaves, actually, wreaths. Yeah, so anyway, it was embellished with wreaths of charming flowers that attracted sweetly humming bees, and with tapestries of linen, silk, and various other fabrics. There's no purport to these two verses, so verse 16. The palace looked charming, with beds, couches, fans, and seats, all separately arranged in 7 stories, as we mentioned. So it was big. It was, for a castle, particularly in the sky, it really was big. So Prabhupada briefly discusses that the words uparyupari vinyasta indicate, which means placed one upon another, uparyupari vinyasta, that Prabhupada says this indicates Skyscrapers are not newly invented. Even in those days, millions of years ago, the idea of building many-storied houses was current. And not just one or two rooms, but many apartments, completely decorated with cushions, bedsteads, sitting places, and carpets. Verse 17. Its beauty was enhanced by artistic engravings here and there on the walls. The floor was of emerald with coral daisies. Oh, now this is amazing. The floor was of emeralds with coral daisies. Oh, daisies? Dioeces. Dioeces, not daisies. I'm sorry. Dais. A dais is a raised platform. Yes. It's like a low stage, a dais. Excuse me. So let me just read the purport. At the present moment, people are very proud of their architectural art, yet floors are generally decorated with colored cement. It appears, however, that the castle constructed by the yogic powers of Kardama Muni had floors of emerald with coral dioeces. Verse 18. The palace was very beautiful, with its coral thresholds at the entrances, and its doors bedecked with diamonds. Gold pinnacles crowned its domes of sapphire. And this is just completely incredible by our current standards. So there's no purport to verse 18, so we go on to verse 19. With the choicest rubies set in its diamond walls, it appeared as though possessed of eyes. It was furnished with wonderful canopies and greatly valuable gates of gold. So, Prabhupada says that the artistic jewelry decorations giving the appearance of eyes, that was not imaginary. And Prabhupada makes the point that even in recent times, means the last few hundred years before the British just sort of smashed everybody, but the Mughal emperors, who did a lot of smashing themselves, they constructed their palaces with decorations of jeweled birds with eyes made of valuable stones. In the meantime, of course, the stones have been taken away by the authorities, but the valuable stones, but the basic work of the walls and so on, the construction of it, you can still see where those things were put. Yeah, there are little recesses and little places where the jewels could be put. Yeah, and, of course, the authorities, it's very difficult for them to do something really nice. The government authorities. So then, Prabhupada continues, the royal palaces were built with jewels and rare stones resembling eyes, and therefore at night they would give off reflective light without the need of lamps. Verse 20. Here and there in that palace were multitudes of live swans and pigeons, as well as artificial swans and pigeons so lifelike that the real swans rose above them again and again, thinking them live birds like themselves. Thus the palace vibrated with the sounds of these birds. Yes, these artists, some of them are just so incredible. even like Srila Prabhupada here in our temple. I remember one day, and it's happened, as I understand, it's happened more than once. Srila Prabhupada, he's done so expertly. He's completely lifelike. And from a little distance, even for someone with regular eyesight, if you don't know, you could easily think this is actually Prabhupada in person. But I remember being approached by one man quite some number of years ago, like 10 or maybe more. And this elderly man walked up to me in the temple room and said, "You know, Swami won't talk. I asked him questions. Swami wouldn't talk to me." Because he actually thought that Prabhupada, the deity, is real. Of course, we know Prabhupada is real. But in order, and you can speak to him, he'll hear you. But in order to get a reply from him, you have to be very advanced. Verse 21, the castle had pleasure grounds, resting chambers, bedrooms, and inner and outer yards designed with an eye to comfort. All this caused astonishment to the sage himself. So Karadama himself, he was living in a humble hermitage, practically just living under trees. But when he saw the palace that he had created with his mystical powers, then with all sorts of different rooms for different purposes, he was astonished. And Prabhupada says, this is the way of a God-gifted person. Someone like Karadama can exhibit such opulence by his mystical power. But when he produced the opulence, he couldn't understand, how did that happen? How was it? Did I do that? So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, when a yogi's power is exhibited, the yogi himself is sometimes astonished. Verse 22. When he saw Devahuti looking at the gigantic opulent palace with a displeased heart, Karadama Muni could understand her feelings because he could study the heart of anyone. Thus he personally addressed his wife as follows. Yes, so there's a short purport. Basically, the point is, Devahuti had lived a long time in the ashram, not taking care of her body, so her body was dirty. Her clothing was not nice. Maybe it was sort of ragged type clothing. So how could she live in such a palace in that condition? So therefore, he addresses her in verse 23, "My dear Devahuti, you look very much afraid. First bathe in Lake Bindu Sarovar created by Lord Vishnu himself, which can grant all the desires of a human being, and then mount this airplane." So anyway, Prabhupada makes some general comments at the beginning. It's still the system to go to a pilgrimage place and bathe. Vrindavan, in Vrindavan in the Yamuna, go to Prayag, bathe in the Ganges, and Mayapur bathe in the Ganges also. Jagannath Puri bathe in the sea. So Prabhupada says the words Tirtham Ashisham yapakam, refer to fulfilling desires by bathing in a place of pilgrimage. Yes. Anyway, so Prabhupada concludes the purport of verse 23 by saying, Kardama Muni advised his good wife to bathe in Lake Bindu Sarovar so that she could revive the former beauty and luster of her body. And we noted, I think not yesterday, maybe the day before, or just a few days ago, that Bindu Sarovar, Bindu means tears, drops, like tear drops, and Sarovar means lake. So initially when we read about it, it wasn't completely clear. Was it created by the tears of the Lord? Or was it a lake already, which then also contained some tears when the Lord shed some tears, so they entered into the existing lake? But actually, the point is that the lake, Bindu Sarovar, is created of the tears of Lord Vishnu himself. Right, so, okay, verse 24. The lotus-eyed Devahuti accepted the order of her husband. Because of her dirty dress and the locks of matted hair on her head, she did not look very attractive. So let me just read the 1 or 2 sentence, very short purport. It appears that Devahuti's hair had remained uncombed for many years and had become complicated in tangles. In other words, she neglected her bodily dress and comforts to engage in the service of her husband. Right, verse 25. Her body was coated with a thick layer of dirt, and her breasts were discolored. She dove, however, into the lake, which contained the sacred waters of the Saraswati and the tears of the Lord. So she dove, she took a dive into the lake. There's no purport here, so we'll read verse 26. In a house inside the lake, she saw 1,000 girls, all in the prime of youth, and fragrant like lotuses. Verse 27. Seeing her, the damsels suddenly rose and said with folded hands, "We are your maid servants. Tell us what we can do for you." So Prabhupada explains that while Devahuti was thinking of what to do in this great palace in this dirty condition, then by the mystical powers of Kardama Muni, 1,000 maidservants appeared before Devahuti. They came just to serve her, and they were just awaiting her orders. Verse 28. The girls, being very respectful to Devahuti, brought her forth, and after bathing her with valuable oils and ointments, they gave her fine, new, spotless cloth to cover her body. There's no purport here, so we read verse 29. They then decorated her with very excellent and valuable jewels, which shone brightly. Next they offered her food containing all good qualities, and a sweet, inebriating drink called asavam. And there's very short purport here. Prabhupada says, asavam is an Ayurvedic medical preparation It is not a liquor. It is especially made from drugs and is meant to improve metabolism for the healthy condition of the body. Okay. So then on to verse 30. Then in a mirror she beheld her own reflection. Her body was completely freed from all dirt, and she was adorned with a garland, dressed in unsullied robes, and decorated with auspicious marks of tilak. She was served very respectfully by the maids. Unsullied robes basically means spotless, completely clean, so clean they're just like super clean, like new, really, more or less. Verse 31. Her entire body, including her head, was completely bathed, and she was decorated all over with ornaments. She wore a special necklace with a locket. There were bangles on her wrists and tinkling anklets of gold about her ankles. So, Srila Prabhupada, referring to the verse, refers to the word Kritashira Snanam. Kritashira Snanam is, where is it now? It's in the first line. Okay. Kritashira means including the head. Snanam, bathing including the head. So, I mean, that's an interesting point. Prabhupada says that according to Smriti Shastra's directions for daily duties, ladies are allowed to bathe daily up to the neck. The hair on the head does not necessarily have to be washed daily, because the mass of wet hair may cause a cold. For ladies, therefore, taking a bath up to the neck is ordinarily prescribed. Yes. And they take a full bath only on certain occasions. So, but this time, I'm sure we can understand it, I'm sure. Devahuti took a full bath and washed her hair, which we read, it hadn't been, what was it? Let me just see. Prabhupada says, it's in verse 24, the purport, it appears that Devahuti's hair had remained uncombed for many years. All right, so sorry, back to the purport of verse 31. So Devahuti, yes, takes a full bath, including washing her hair. And Srila Prabhupada makes the point that there are two types of baths for ladies. An ordinary bath means, we take from what's said here. An ordinary bath up to the neck is called Mala Snanam. And then when she takes a full bath, including the head, it's called Shira Snanam. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, at this time she needs sufficient oil to smear on her head. That is the direction of the commentators of Smriti Shastra. All right. So verse 32. About her hips she wore a girdle of gold set with numerous jewels, and she was further adorned with a precious pearl necklace and auspicious substances. So Srila Prabhupada comments that these auspicious substances include saffron, kumkum, sandalwood pulp, and actually before taking a bath, there are other auspicious substances before, such as turmeric mixed with mustard seed oil. This is smeared all over the body. So, in this case with Devahuti, all kinds of auspicious substance were used to bathe Devahuti from top to toe. From top to toe. Yes, right. Verse 33. Her countenance shone with beautiful teeth and charming eyebrows, her eyes distinguished by lovely moist corners, defeated the beauty of lotus buds. Her face was surrounded by dark curling tresses. So again, we'll just read the purport. It's very short. According to Vedic culture, white teeth are very much appreciated. Devahuti's white teeth increased the beauty of her face and made it look like a lotus flower. When a face looks very attractive, the eyes are generally compared to lotus petals and the face to a lotus flower. All right, on to verse 34. When she thought of her great husband, the best of the sages, Karadama Muni, who was very dear to her, let me just read it again. When she thought of her great husband, the best of the sages, Karadama Muni, who was very dear to her, she, along with all the maidservants, at once appeared where he was. Right, so Prabhupada says it appears from this verse, that in the beginning Devahuti thought herself to be dirty and dressed in a very niggardly way, basically means like very poverty-stricken and just kind of deprived way. So then Karadama asked her to go into the lake. The maidservants appeared and they took care of her. And after everything was done in the water, and so she's just really nicely, very presentable, she thought of Karadama, and then by mystic power, she was brought to him without delay. And Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, these are some of the powers attained by perfect yogis. They can immediately execute anything they desire. Verse 35. She was amazed to find herself surrounded by 1,000 maids in the presence of her husband and to witness his yogic power. So Devahuti saw all these things done like miracles, but when suddenly she's brought in front of her husband, she understood that it was all due to his mystical power. And then she understood that nothing's impossible for a yogi like him. Then verses 36 and 37 are together. The sage could see that Devahuti had washed herself clean and was shining forth as though no longer his former wife. Like he couldn't recognize her, even though they'd been together basically 24/7 for years. She had regained her own original beauty as the daughter of a prince, dressed in excellent robes, her charming breasts duly girded She was waited upon by 1,000 Gandharva girls. O destroyer of the enemy, his fondness for her grew, and he placed her on the aerial mansion. So Srila Prabhupada explains that before marriage, of course, as we read, Devahuti looked very beautiful as her parents brought her and presented her to Kardama. But then, after a marriage, when she was engaged in her service, just so much, then she neglected to care for her body like a princess. And since there was no way of taking care, she didn't have sophisticated cosmetics, toiletries, soaps and shampoos and oils and etc., etc., etc. So her royal beauty disappeared. But now she's regained her beauty, and Kardama Muni is again attracted, as he was just before the marriage or right at the time of the marriage. And Hare Krishna, Prabhupada says, the real beauty of a young woman is her breasts. Okay, that's not so much for the sannyasis, Hari Bol. So anyway, when Kardama saw them nicely decorated, he was attracted, even though he was a great renowned sage. So, interesting little point at the end of the purport, Shankaracharya has therefore warned people who want to achieve spiritual realization, you must not be attracted to the breasts of a young woman. All they are is an interaction of fat and blood within the body. Hare Krishna. Yes, well, it's true. All right, so verse 38. Although seemingly attached to his beloved consort while served by the Gandharva girls, the sage did not lose his glory, which was mastery over his self. In the aerial mansion, Kardama Muni, with his consort, shone as charmingly as the moon in the midst of the stars in the sky, which causes rows of lilies to open in ponds at night. So, Prabhupada appreciates the composition of the verse, how the verse has been put together, that the mansion was in the sky, the palace or the castle, and therefore the comparison to the full moon and the stars is it's very poetic, actually. It's very nice. Kardama looked like the full moon, and the girls who were surrounding Devahuti seemed just like the stars. And Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, on a full moon night, the stars and the moon together form a beautiful constellation. Similarly, in that aerial mansion in the sky, Kardama Muni with his beautiful wife and the damsels surrounding them appeared like the moon and stars on a full moon night. Very nice. Verse 39. In that aerial mansion, he traveled to the pleasure valleys of Mount Meru, which were rendered all the more beautiful by cool, gentle, fragrant breezes that stimulated passion. In these valleys, the treasurer of the gods, Kuvera, surrounded by beautiful women and praised by the siddhas, generally enjoys pleasure. Kuvera. They're pleasure gardens, but oftentimes or generally Kuvera is the one who enjoys them. So now Kardama, also surrounded by his wife and these beautiful girls, went there and enjoyed for many years. All right. So Srila Prabhupada comments, Kuvera is one of the 8 demigods in charge of the different directions of the universe. And then they're listed out, the demigods in charge of the different directions of the universe. So it said Indra is in charge of the eastern side, where the heavenly planet or paradise is situated. Similarly, Agni is in charge of the southeastern portion. Yama, the demigod who punishes sinners, is in charge of the southern portion. Niriti is in charge of the southwestern part. Varuna, the demigod in charge of the waters, is in charge of the western portion. Vayu, who controls the air and who has wings to travel in the air, is in charge of the northwestern part of the universe. And Kuvera, the treasurer of the demigods, is in charge of the northern part of the universe. So they all go, Prabhupada says actually, all the demigods take pleasure in the valleys of Mount Meru, which is situated somewhere between the sun and the earth. So in his aerial mansion, Kardama Muni traveled throughout the 8 directions, controlled by the different demigods. And as the demigods go to Mount Meru, he also went there to enjoy life. And Prabhupada says, when one, means a man, when one is surrounded by beautiful young girls, sex stimulation naturally becomes prominent. Kardama Muni became sexually stimulated and enjoyed with his wife for many, many years in that part of Mount Meru. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, but his sex indulgence was praised by many, many siddhas, beings who have attained perfection. So it was praised by them, they're like demigods, you can say, because it was intended to produce good progeny for the good of universal affairs. Okay, so on we go to verse 40. Satisfied by his wife, he enjoyed in that aerial mansion not only on Mount Meru, but in different gardens known as Vaishrambaka, Surasana, Nandana, Pushpabhadrika, and Chaitrarathya, and by the Manasa Sarovar lake. There's no purport to that verse, so we go on to verse 41. He traveled in that way through the various planets, as the air passes uncontrolled in every direction. Coursing through the air in that great and splendid aerial mansion, which could fly at his will, he surpassed even the demigods. Okay, so here, verse 41, there is a purport. Not a big purport, but it's a purport. So generally speaking, Prabhupada says, the planets of the demigods are restricted to their own orbits. But Kardama Muni, by his power, traveled without restriction. So normally traveling to other planets is not possible, and even for the demigods, even for demigods, can't just move from one planet to another. I mean, some can, but not all. But Kardama Muni surpassed the demigods and traveled everywhere. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the words yata anila indicate that as the air is free to move anywhere without restriction, so Kardama Muni unrestrictedly traveled in all directions of the universe. Right, okay, so here now verse 42 is the last verse in this section, and it's sort of like a blessing, or it's certainly a glorification. Verse 42, what is difficult to achieve for determined men who have taken refuge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead's lotus feet? His feet are the source of sacred rivers like the Ganges, which put an end to the dangers of mundane life. Yes, so anything's possible for determined devotees. So, right, let's have a look at the purport. In the third line, and it goes on to the fourth line actually of the verse, Yar ashritas tirtha padascharana. Prabhupada said these words are significant. The Lord is known as Tirthapad, that his lotus feet are sacred. And the Ganges is sacred because it comes from his feet. So basically, as the verse says, that nothing is impossible for any living entity who has taken shelter at the holy lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Kardama is special, not because he's a great mystic, although he is a great mystic, but he's special because he's a great devotee. Yes, so therefore, even though yogis can perform wonderful things, Kardama was more than a yogi because he was a great devotee. Therefore, he was more glorious than a regular yogi. And Prabhupada refers to Bhagavad Gita. It's actually chapter 6, verse 47, that out of many yogis, he who is a devotee of the Lord is first class, is the greatest devotee. So, and a person like Kardama, there's no question of him being conditioned. He was already a liberated soul and better than the demigods who are conditioned. Yes. So, therefore, even though he was enjoying with his wife and many other women, he was above material conditional life. And Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, therefore, the word vyasanatyaya is used to indicate that he was beyond the position of a conditioned soul. He was transcendental to all material limitations. So the next section is from verse 43 to 48. And it's the fifth section, and we call it Devahuti and Kardama enjoy together. Yes, verse 43 to 48. Yes, okay. Verse 43 to 48. So let me read through the translations. Verse 43. After showing his wife the globe of the universe and its different arrangements, full of many wonders, the great yogi Kardama Muni returned to his own hermitage. 44. After coming back to his hermitage, he divided himself into 9 personalities just to give pleasure to Devahuti, the daughter of Manu, who was eager for sex life. In that way he enjoyed with her for many, many years, which passed just like a moment. 45. In that aerial mansion, Devahuti, in the company of her handsome husband, situated on an excellent bed that increased sexual desires, could not realize how much time was passing. 46. While the couple who eagerly longed for sexual pleasure were thus enjoying themselves by virtue of mystic powers, 100 autumns passed like a brief span of time. 47. The powerful Kardama Muni was the knower of everyone's heart, and he could grant whatever one desired. Knowing the spiritual soul, he regarded her as half of his body. Dividing himself into 9 forms, he impregnated Devahuti with 9 discharges of semen. Verse 48. Immediately afterward, on the same day, Devahuti gave birth to 9 female children, all charming in every limb and fragrant with the scent of the red lotus flower. So, all right. So what we'll do, devotees, we'll stop here. We'll stop here, and tomorrow we'll go on and read the verses again with their purports, and then go on to the final section of the chapter. Okay, so all right, very good. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.